Welcome back to Capra Convos, and today I've got Lise again, and we're going to take on right where we left off. And we were talking before about the young people that were helped through the public school system, through helping them to make choices through the, was it a curriculum?
Yes, it was 8 days. We were 8 days in each school.
And going into the public schools for 3 years, she got to do that many days. What you said, how much time you spent there?
It was 8 days for each school. So, and then I just moved on to a different school after I was done.
And what she was doing was helping young people through statistics learn about, how
risk reduction, assertiveness skills, just talk about how to not get in pressure, how to not find themselves in pressure situations. It was awesome.
And though it wasn't youth ministry, it was youth ministry.
Yeah.
And so we just thought that was such an effective way to get outside the box in your paradigm of what you think ministry really is, and really help people right where they're at, doing that through education, doing that through media. And Lise shared how she also had this passion to help unwed mothers. And so today she told just a little glimpse of her own adoption story, and I want her to tell about that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it was, I said just a couple things last week, but when I was 17, as I said, had my first pregnancy, and somebody I thought I was going to marry at 17, but anyway, that didn't work out, and my parents were pretty shocked. It was something where they didn't know how to talk to me about it, so I think the best thing that happened to me is that they sent me to a counselor so that I could slow things down, talk about things, and that was just a huge benefit for me, because as we discovered, and as I've said already, I ended up choosing adoption. And that for me, she literally walked through the process that I was going to be going through. So here I was going to be 6 months down the road going through this, and I had already walked through it in my mind. And so that was a huge benefit for me, and it just really marked me in what a blessing that was. My parents had made the decision that if I chose to parent, I was going to be out of the house. So that was tough. And so adoption was the option that I chose, and by the time that I did give my son up for adoption at the hospital, I was ready. It was really hard, very hard, as you can only imagine. I cried a lot. I tried to cry softly because I got to hold my baby. I got to hug him, and one thing, even as a 17-year-old who had a sort of a nominal faith at that point, really, I was able to think about, I just wanted to pray for him. So I prayed for him, that he would have a wonderful life, wonderful family, and that he would literally feel no abandonment, nothing that made him feel as though he was any different than anybody else, but that he was just loved and no void or abandonment. So that was huge for me. And then when I left the hospital, I thought, that's it. And it was a hard chapter for me. But I felt like in walking through that with somebody, I felt like, okay, I had made a choice that I felt good about for my son's sake. I was aware that there were 2 people involved in this pregnancy, and I had an innocent, vulnerable child to think for, and that I had to be courageous in what I decided to do. And so that was my way of doing it. So 3 years later, fast forward, and as I said in the last segment, I was engaged, thought I was going to be married, and we broke up, and I found out I was pregnant. And this time I thought, there's no way that I could go back there and do that again. That was really, really hard, and even though I felt like I made a really positive choice for my child, I thought, okay, this is it. I'm gonna keep this child. I'm 20 years old now, going on 21, and I can do this. And really, as the months went on, and as I said, I did go to Birthright. Then with this one, I got a chance again to have this conversation with somebody and talk it through. And as I was talking it through and thinking about it at night, even though months wore on where I thought, no, I'm keeping this child, it's too hard to think about something else. Very shortly before I was getting ready to give birth, I came back to what had really informed my decision for Kevin and my son, and that was, I need to think for my child, do I have a better job? Am I ready? I had a very challenging relationship with my dad, and I really wanted my child to have two parents ready, willing, able, financially in place, everything that was in place for a child, not where I was with a nominal paying job. So I made the choice once again to give this child up for adoption very shortly before I gave birth. Connected with an attorney who knew a ministry family who he greatly admired, and he said, I really think that I have a great placement for your child. And so once again, here I was in the hospital and making this choice again, and again, very challenging, a lot of tears. My mother got to be there with me both times, and she got to hold my child. I got to hold my little baby girl, and she was beautiful, and just held her, stroked her hair, and I remember praying for her too. And I just said, God, I just pray she would have the best life, and she would always feel so loved, and that she would never feel any void or abandonment, and have great friends and family that surround her, or even husband I prayed for. And so,
I just want to comment on that because I've known Lise, and I didn't know you back then, but I've known this story, and that was one of the most significant things that you said about it, I believe, is that you prayed for both of these children and how it would affect their life, and it made all the difference.
I believe it did, because if you fast forward, and I'll make this quick because I know we've got short time, and I have to leave out a lot of details because this is short.
But she's got a book in the works.
Yes, I do. So lots more details because it is so miraculous. It's just, it's phenomenal what happened. But just fast forward from that adoption, that time of adoption with my little girl, and 1 year later I met my husband, and a wonderful man. He knew about both adoptions, loved me, embraced me, and we had 2 children together and a wonderful, wonderful life. So grateful for that. But I did keep this passion in me for what I'd been through, and always thought, boy, I'd love to help somebody else that went through that same situation. And that's where we came to in the last segment, was talking about that desire to work with girls that were in unplanned pregnancies. And so ultimately, after 3 years at life at the organization, the Youth Development Organization, I ended up at another organization, and they helped women in unplanned pregnancies, and that's what they did. That's all they did, and it was a similar situation to Birthright, but they were life-affirming, help walk girls through the very challenging moments. And so here I am working then for that organization, spent another 5 years there as a director of clinic services, and I'm sitting in my office, and I am looking at my, I'm on the phone with the executive director. I'm looking at through my emails. There were so many every day. And I look in the subject line, all of a sudden I see this birth daughter. And I'm just like, my heart, like, just stopped for a second. And I said, oh my goodness, oh my gosh. The director says, what is it? And I said, I'm seeing birth daughter in a subject line. And she said, open it, open it. So I wanted to read you what I read that day, just because it was so amazing, because literally everything that I had hoped for and wanted to hear about my child, I got to hear in this letter. And so I'll just read it. Not sure how to start a letter like this, so I'm sorry if I'm not very well spoken or eloquent. I am your birth daughter, and my name is Abigail, Abby. I just found out 2 weeks ago that you have been looking for me, and just received your email today. It seems like your search has been long, so I didn't want to sit on this and make you wait any longer than necessary to hear something from me, now that I know. I always said that if I could ever say just one thing to my birth mother, it would be thank you. So let me start with that. Thank you for doing the selfless thing. Thank you for doing the hard thing. Thank you for thinking more about me than you did yourself. Thank you for praying for me. Thank you for giving me to a family who would teach me about the Lord and lead me to Him. You gave me my life, and you gave me my family. I am so incredibly grateful. I want you to know that what you did for me has defined my whole life. My parents always told me from the time I could understand it all that I was adopted. I had a little book about it, and I loved reading it, and I used to crawl into their bed at night and ask them to tell me the story of my adoption again. I always thought I was extra special because God had to go to all that extra work to get me to the right family. I never felt abandoned or sad about it. I always just felt really blessed. I know that for you that day 35 years ago was very different than it was for me. I know that you made a huge sacrifice that was very hard on you. I don't know how you feel about that day and that time, but I can imagine it was very difficult. Again, all I can say is thank you, which doesn't feel like enough. And so then she said, I'm gonna stop here in case this isn't your email, but
Wow.
yeah, so that was the letter that I got, and
So don't we have somebody here special to
we do
tell us
have
more?
somebody.
Another
Abby.
side of this. So I want to introduce Abby to you, Abby Francis. This is the birth daughter that found the mom.
Hi.
Hello. It's been great getting to know you. We have a lot in common. We won't share on here, but it's great. So I just want to hear a little from both your perspectives, because one thing that I keep thinking about is, and we both talked about this, there's such a stigma with adoption, and I want to hear from each of your perspective how you overcome that.
Okay. Yeah.
Do I go?
You
Me first? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just even hearing that letter again that I wrote, like, makes me cry. It's very emotional, because I did my whole life. I never had an issue with being adopted. I never felt, abandoned or any negative feeling at all. I really just thought I was extra blessed. I thought it was a really neat and redemptive story. And so for me, when anyone doesn't understand adoption, I try to not be personally offended. A lot of times people don't know I'm adopted because I actually, as much as I look like her, which I know is a lot, I actually kind of look like my adoptive parents too. So people didn't assume I was adopted, and they would sometimes make comments about adoption to me, not knowing that I was adopted.
oh wow.
Yeah, just like, oh, I could never love a kid that's not my own, or something like, yeah, which like, oh, it's like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm unlovable, but instead of being offended, I tried to think, okay, how can I educate you on why that's not how you should feel. And so I would just share my story with them, and it's not, first of all, being adopted, I can say firsthand, it's literally no different. To me, it feels like blood. I forget all the time that I'm adopted. I always ask my mom, so when you were giving birth to me, oh yeah, sorry, wait, you didn't give birth to me. Like, it was, it's just, she's my mom.
Sure.
So it was no different. And so it felt so foreign to me that someone could think you couldn't have that same amount of love. And the other thing that I found so hurtful now, especially being on the other side of this relationship, was how people would disparage a birth mother for giving up her child.
Right.
And I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. I always thought of it from the perspective that I was just talking about, which was a misunderstanding of the connection you could have with an adopted child, which is patently false. But then to think of how people treat a birth mother and think, that she's done something wrong by not keeping her child, that she's abandoned that child. And I had a moment where I was watching this sweet Facebook video, one of those ones that comes up that's supposed to, make you cry. And it was talking about this family who had gotten the news that they were going to get a baby, and it was, the mom signed away her rights, and it was that moment for them was amazing. When you're on the receiving end of that child and they sign away their rights, to you that is like the biggest moment. And so to me, I think, oh my gosh, what a relief for them, what a joy for them, and they're so excited, and the video is so beautiful. And I made the mistake of reading in the comments, and all these people were just saying nasty things about the birth mom. Just, I can't believe she would sign away her baby, and she'd given her baby away, and that's terrible, and all of this stuff. And I'm like, how is this what we're taking from this beautiful story?
Right.
And so I just felt really led, even then, to tell more and more people, as many people as will listen, that that was not, a selfish thing for the mom to do. That was the most selfless thing she could possibly ever do.
Yes.
And when I think about what she did for me, having had my own child now, to hold your baby that you've just carried in your womb for 9 months and that you love dearly, and to say, I think that someone else could take better care of you. I mean, just try to think of it from that perspective. it's so powerful. It's literally the most selfless thing you could do.
Yes.
She was thinking more, and that's what I said in my letter. You were thinking more about me than you were yourself. So,
and it makes me think too of the crisis we've had in our country, and it's coming to just a crescendo that needs to be stopped, of abortion, and to somehow categorize in a derogatory way. I mean, abortion is killing of unborn children, and yet adoption is giving life and giving a gift, and it's just twisted. So we just wanted to dispel that stigma and get rid of it. And I know you know even some statistics with that.
Well, I do. One of the things that was wonderful, that I loved as being able to work with young people too, was the fact that I got to share with them. A lot of people, their misconception was that somehow they're going to end up with bad parents. That was, I guess there's all kinds of Lifetime movies, right? And things that are out there that are these horrible stories.
yeah.
And so I got the opportunity to say, okay, statistically that's not accurate, number one. Number two is, let me ask you, which one of you that had your parents and you were not adopted, which one of your parents had to take a test before they could have you? Which one had to write a long home study, had to be checked into your finances, checked into your health records, all of those things that make you qualify to be a parent? And I said, raise your hand, and nobody raised their hand. And of course that went on in every school that I was in. And so there was this, breaking of the idea, this mold that there's, and even at the women's clinic, when we start sharing the options for people, and it was a life-affirming clinic, and talk about adoption, they never thought that through. They just always thought it has this ugly stigma to it. And so amazing. I do want to go back just 1 second, and just because I know we're short on time, but prior to finding Abby, of course, you know that I found my son. And as I said, that's going to be in the book. There's just too much to tell. But I will say this, that his mother, I reached out and wrote a letter to his mother, and she asked if she could call me. And we had this quick conversation on the phone, but she wanted to just tell me, you have no idea what you've done. You have radically altered our lives. Thank you so much. You have no idea what your sacrifice has done for us. Mm-hmm. And then she ran up to Kinko's, zipped off a bunch of pictures, and overnighted them to me.
Wow.
And we did have a reunion. It was beautiful. The things that happened from that, she had literally written down pretty much every day of his life, had an entire wall dedicated to him that was in books, videos, every card that was given to him. And when we finally did meet, she just started handing me things and said, I wanted you to be able to see his life. So when you think about the other end, and you think, what part of this is not affirming life?
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's a gift to those people on the receiving end. So to see it as anything but selfless is very confusing to me, but apparently that's a pretty big stance that people are taking, is that it's being selfish to give your baby in a way. It's so the opposite.
But it's uneducated.
It's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. And we just wanted to bring light to it.
Yeah.
And thank you both for opening up and sharing your story. I want to hear from each of your point of view, what's happened through this reconnection.
Yeah, well, unbelievable things, honestly, but you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I've always loved the verse Romans 8:28, which is about God working all things together for good for those who love him, or called according to his purpose. I've always loved that verse, but I think through meeting Lise and the whole way that I can look back and see how the Lord was weaving everything together, that's become like my life verse, because it's just so cool to see through some hardship that my parents went through without being able to have a baby, and how then, through some hardship that she went through, how that helped redeem, that for my parents, and just how he's always working something out.
Yes.
I think it's been super eye-opening for me, just in my relationship with the Lord, to see like how he really is ultimately always working all of our hardest, most hurtful things that are happening in our life. He is working through a redemption story. And so there's many, many, many things that have happened, of course, just gaining, a new family. That's amazing. And so there's a lot of that. But then in the spiritual realm, there's a lot that I think I've discovered as well.
Beautiful. And so what would you say in the area of if somebody would ask you about, well, do you have regrets?
Ooh.
How would you?
I would
now that you know how
say-
great I am, don't you ever?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, I don't. I have no regrets. I made some poor decisions with regard to intimacy before marriage. I took responsibility for those in a way that I felt like I was caring for my child in the best way and my life, and we both mattered, and I trusted God. And I always say that I see a picture of Abby when we very first met that a friend of hers took. It was beautiful, and it was her hugging my neck and her head over my shoulder, and it reminded me of that day that I held her in the hospital, and I just prayed for her and loved on her and just prayed that she would have the best life. And so that picture, I always call it the other side, because it was on the other side of my faith and an act of love was this beautiful woman and her husband and her children and my son and his family and the children. And so at this point now, they've all gotten to meet. She came into town, the brothers met, she met two brothers, my son and my daughter. I can't go into all the details. Like I said, we're short on time, but I don't know, I can't tell too many more. We've come back and forth, and it's going to be in the book. But let me just say this scripture is the one that's most alive to me, is God will do exceedingly abundantly above all that you can ask or think, according to the power that works in you. And I believe that that's what he did. He did. My husband likes to say, if we sat down and we tried to write this story of how beautiful that choice was and what it became in these beautiful human beings and their lives and the significance of those, we never could have written a story. You don't know in advance how beautiful something is, but on the other side, God will do exceedingly abundantly above all you can ask or think. So
what I want to do before we close is ask you two to just address people that maybe this hasn't affected you in a personal way, maybe it has, but how they can, or even people that you know, so that there's freedom from shame, freedom from guilt, condemnation, and you can see how in dark times, when you put your trust in God and you just walk forward, that you can walk free of all of that, and God can restore things and turn things around.
Yeah.
And so you can just address each one of you in a prayerful way with people that are watching.
Yeah. Well, I would just say that there's, I could have made a different choice, and I know that God would redeem and have forgiven me for that. And I know many people and dear friends that have gotten caught in the cycle of fear and have had really hard things to live with. And so I just want to say there's redemption and love from God and grace from God for you. And but please pass this along, because I think you and I have heard too many times that people are hearing other things, and we really believe that God orchestrated this story to help be a light on the way that he does things. And he's a redeemer.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what she just said, and you know, it's not that I couldn't have had a good life had she kept me, but I certainly wouldn't have the life that I have now. And so you look at that choice, and I remember her sitting in the living room and then looking at this community. My husband is a worship pastor, and we have a great community of people, and she got to meet a lot of them, and she was looking around the room, and she said it was like this moment, like one choice in my life. If I had done something different, none of this would exist. I mean, I wouldn't be married to my husband, I wouldn't have my daughter, I wouldn't be doing the ministry that I'm doing, certainly, because, you know, I would have lived somewhere else, been raised somewhere else, gone to a different college, you know, all of those things. So to think the choices that you make are important, and so to be thoughtful and prayerful about those decisions, and even when you make the wrong one, God can redeem it. So even if you have, you know, gotten pregnant unintentionally, or even if you've had an abortion in the past, I mean, we certainly don't want to shame anyone that's been through that. That is very hard, and the Lord can redeem your heart in that as well. So that's what I would say.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
We just pray peace for you, and share this video. I know it's spoken to many people. It's such a beautiful story. It's inspiring every time I hear it, and I've just had the great privilege of being right in on this all along the way.
Yeah.
So I wish I had a website to give you, but you can contact us through capramin.com and stay in tune with what we're doing, or even put something in the comments and we can put you in touch with Lise.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Yeah.